Since the file instructs the story to be written section by section, here is part 1. Dad, what did you just say? My mother's smile widened as she slid a thick envelope across the Thanksgiving table. We sold your vacant cabin, she said proudly. You never go there anyway. My father leaned back in his chair, lifted several bundled stacks of cash from the envelope, and began counting them one by one as though he were presenting a trophy. I told your mother we'd get a better price than the realtor expected. Around the table, my cousins laughed. About time, one of them said. It was just sitting there rotting. You should thank your parents. I slowly lowered my coffee mug onto its saucer. The room waited for me to explode. Instead, I asked one question. Who signed the closing documents? Dad smirked. I'm your father. We handled it. Mom waved her hand dismissively. You've barely stepped foot in that cabin for months. Somebody had to make a sensible decision. A few relatives nodded in agreement. One aunt frowned at me. Honestly, Tasha, you've always been too attached to things. No one noticed the black SUVs pulling quietly into the driveway. No one except me. The front door opened before anyone could ask why strangers had arrived during Thanksgiving dinner. Several men and women wearing federal credentials stepped inside. The room fell silent as the lead agent scanned every face around the table before speaking. Which one of you authorized the sale of protected federal property? Every conversation stopped. Even my father froze with a bundle of cash still in his hand. The lead agent displayed a leather credential holder before calmly addressing everyone. My name is Special Agent Collins. We need everyone to remain exactly where they are. Confused looks spread across the dining room. My mother laughed nervously. There must be some mistake. There isn't, the agent replied. Dad pushed back his chair. This is my daughter's cabin. We sold it, perfectly legal. I kept my eyes on him. No, I said quietly. You sold my cabin. He shrugged. You never used it. Several relatives immediately joined in. She's always away. It was practically abandoned. They probably saved you from paying taxes. No one at the table knew why I had bought that cabin years earlier. No one knew why I drove there every few weeks without telling anyone. No one knew why I refused every offer to rent it, renovate it, or sell it. Most importantly, no one knew why I had warned my parents, more than once, that they were never to enter the property without my permission. My father dismissed those conversations as if they had never happened. We improved your finances, he said confidently. You'll thank us eventually. Instead of arguing, I looked at the federal agent. His expression hadn't changed since he walked through the door. He turned toward another investigator who was already opening a case file. Then he looked back at my father. Sir, he said evenly, before we proceed, I need you to answer one very important question. My father smiled confidently. Go ahead. The agent opened the file. I'll ask only once. I'll ask only once. The room stayed silent. Dad folded his arms, the confidence still written across his face. What exactly are you accusing me of? Agent Collins didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward me. Ms. Bennett, can you confirm whether you authorized anyone to sell your cabin? No. One word. Nothing more. Mom rolled her eyes. Oh, stop being dramatic. We were doing what any reasonable parents would do. I turned toward her. I told both of you never to enter that property. She scoffed. You've said a lot of things. Dad pointed a finger at me. You disappear for weeks at a time. That place sits empty. You don't even enjoy it. I wasn't using it as a vacation home. He laughed. Then what were you using it for? Storing old furniture? Several relatives chuckled. I didn't respond. Agent Collins quietly made a note inside his folder. That was the first time I noticed he wasn't reacting emotionally to anything my parents said. He was documenting everything. The realization made my aunt slowly lower her fork. She looked from my father to the agents. What exactly is going on? No one answered her. Instead, another investigator stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, did your daughter ever instruct you not to access the property? Dad shrugged. Sure, she was always overly protective. So she did. It wasn't a big deal. It is now. The room became noticeably quieter. My mind drifted back 3 months. I had been preparing to leave for another environmental inspection, several states away, when Mom called. You still haven't sold that cabin. No. You realize it's just wasting money. It isn't. You haven't slept there in forever. I don't need to. She sighed dramatically. Your father says vacant property is irresponsible. It's my property. Family helps family. I already told you both. What? Don't go there. She laughed. As if we're going to steal it. I almost corrected her. Instead, I ended the call. Looking back, I wished I hadn't dismissed the conversation so easily. A month later, one of my neighbors near the cabin had called. Tasha, I thought you'd hired contractors. I didn't. There were strangers measuring the property. They said they were preparing paperwork. I frowned. What kind of paperwork? I don't know. I assumed you knew. I thanked him and drove past the following weekend. Everything looked untouched. The locks were secure. Nothing appeared disturbed. I convinced myself there had been some misunderstanding. Now, standing in my parents' dining room, every piece suddenly fit together. Those strangers hadn't been surveyors. They'd been preparing the property for a sale I knew nothing about. Dad interrupted my thoughts. You keep acting like we committed some terrible crime. Mom nodded. We actually helped you. You'll have plenty of money once we divide everything fairly. I stared at both of them. You already divided the money. Dad smiled proudly. Of course. We're paying off some family debts. And your cousin needed help. We deserved something too. Several relatives who had accepted congratulations only minutes earlier suddenly avoided eye contact. No one wanted to admit they'd already discussed spending money that had never belonged to them. Agent Collins slowly closed his notebook. Then he looked directly at me. Ms. Bennett. I nodded. I think it's time, he said quietly. Time for what? I think it's time. Agent Collins turned to another investigator. Bring them in. The front door opened again. A middle-aged couple stepped inside, followed by a sharply dressed woman carrying a leather portfolio. Dad frowned. Who are these people? The man answered first. We're the buyers. The dining room became completely still. His wife looked directly at me. I'm so sorry. I blinked. For what? We had no idea your parents didn't own the property. Dad immediately stepped between us. Hold on, we had every right to sell it. The attorney accompanying the buyers calmly placed a folder on the dining table. Our clients were told you had full legal authority from the owner. Dad pointed at himself. I did. You were never listed as the owner. I didn't need to be. You absolutely did. For the first time that evening, uncertainty crossed my father's face. Agent Collins opened another file. Mr. Bennett, we'd like to see every document related to the transaction. Dad smiled again. Gladly. He reached into a nearby briefcase and proudly handed over the purchase agreement. There. Everything was handled professionally. The title company approved it. We paid taxes. We signed every document. He looked around the table as if expecting applause. Instead, The investigators quietly spread the paperwork across the dining table. One investigator examined every page. Another photographed each signature. A third compared identification records. No one spoke. The only sound came from camera shutters and pages turning. Even my relatives stopped eating. The buyers exchanged nervous glances. The husband finally broke the silence. There was one thing we never understood. Agent Collins looked up. What was that? The cabin. What about it? There were signs. What signs? Government boundary markers. We asked whether they meant anything. Everyone turned toward Dad. He shrugged. I told them they were old survey markers. The buyer slowly shook his head. You said they were probably left over from decades ago. I believed that. His wife swallowed hard. There were also locked monitoring stations. Dad interrupted. Just utility boxes. I closed my eyes for a second. He hadn't just ignored my warnings. He had explained away every warning someone else noticed too. Another investigator finally looked up from the documents. Did anyone disclose the federal conservation restrictions before closing? Silence. The buyers looked confused. Their attorney frowned. What restrictions? Agent Collins answered carefully. The restrictions recorded against this property. The attorney's expression changed instantly. What? She grabbed the purchase agreement and flipped through every disclosure page. Again. Then a third time. Her face lost color. These aren't here. No, Agent Collins replied. They aren't. She looked directly at Dad. Did you tell the closing company there were no federal restrictions? I told them exactly what I knew. Which was? That it was just my daughter's unused cabin. Several relatives who had defended him all evening slowly leaned back in their chairs. The confidence that had filled the room only an hour earlier had completely disappeared. Dad pointed toward me. If she'd simply sold it herself, none of this would have happened. I finally spoke. I told you not to touch that property. You never explained why. I didn't have to. We're family. No, I answered quietly. Family doesn't forge authority. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Nobody defended him. Nobody defended Mom. Even my cousin, who had congratulated them earlier, quietly pushed the envelope of cash farther away from himself. Agent Collins gathered the paperwork into evidence sleeves. One by one. Each page disappeared into a sealed bag. Dad frowned. What are you doing? The agent sealed the final document. Preserving evidence. Preserving evidence. My father stared at the sealed evidence bag as if the words hadn't registered. For what? He demanded. I've told you 3 times already. I own the property. Agent Collins looked at him evenly. Ownership and legal authority are 2 different things. Dad opened his mouth to argue again, but another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A white SUV bearing the seal of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came to a stop outside. 2 more officials entered the house carrying thick binders and a rugged laptop case. One of them nodded at me. Ms. Bennett. I stood. Good evening. My relatives exchanged confused looks. You know them? My aunt asked. I do. The older official shook my hand. We're sorry your holiday turned into this. Dad frowned. What exactly is she involved in? The official didn't answer him. Instead, he opened one of the binders on the dining table. Can you confirm your identity, please? I handed him my driver's license and federal credentials. He compared both with the documents inside the binder before smiling politely. Identity confirmed. He turned the binder around so the investigators could see. At the top of the page was my name. Beneath it were years of inspection reports, environmental compliance records, and conservation agreements. One cousin leaned closer. "What is all that?" "It's the monitoring agreement for the Bennett conservation site," the official replied. Dad laughed nervously. "Conservation site. It's just a cabin." The official looked directly at him. "No, sir. The cabin is part of a federally protected environmental monitoring program." Silence swept through the room again. Mom blinked. "What does that even mean?" "It means the structure supports long-term monitoring of protected wildlife habitat." She stared at me. "You never told us." I wasn't permitted to discuss operational details. The younger federal official connected his laptop. Within seconds, aerial photographs appeared on the television in the dining room. Images of the cabin filled the screen. Colored boundary lines surrounded the property. Several marked locations flashed beside the building. Agent Collins pointed toward one image. "Recognize these." Dad squinted. "The little green boxes. They aren't utility boxes. They're remote environmental monitoring stations." The buyers immediately looked at each other. The husband slowly raised his hand. "We walked right past those during the showing." The official nodded. "Our records indicate multiple unauthorized entries occurred over the past month." My stomach tightened. "So people entered the restricted area?" "Yes." "They also opened one secured equipment enclosure." Mom gasped. "We didn't touch anything." "You personally may not have. But someone acting under this transaction did." The buyers looked horrified. "We thought we were inspecting our future property. No one informed us." Agent Collins nodded sympathetically. "We're aware." Another investigator placed several photographs beside the purchase agreement. The timestamps matched the days my neighbor had called. The strangers with measuring equipment. The trucks. The repeated visits. Every unexplained event suddenly connected. Dad stared at the photographs. "I thought they were inspectors." "They were prospective buyers. You gave them access." "I didn't know." The fish and wildlife official folded his hands. "Mr. Bennett, ignorance doesn't eliminate responsibility." Mom's voice trembled. "We honestly believed she wasn't using the place." I finally looked at both of them. I wasn't keeping it empty. I was protecting it. Neither of them answered. For the first time in years, they had nothing to say. The lead investigator received a phone call. He listened quietly before slipping his phone back into his pocket. Then he turned toward Agent Collins. "We've confirmed the title history, the conservation easement, and the recorded federal restrictions." Collins gave a single nod. He faced my parents. His voice remained calm. "Richard Bennett, Elaine Bennett." Both of them slowly stood. "We are officially opening a fraud investigation into the unauthorized transfer of this protected property." No one moved. The silence that settled over the dining room was heavier than anything that had been said all evening. My father looked from Agent Collins to the federal officials, waiting for someone to laugh and admit it had all been a misunderstanding. No one did. Instead, the senior official from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service opened the final binder. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "we believe you deserve to understand exactly what happened." Dad nodded quickly. "Please, because none of this makes sense." "It will." He laid a detailed property map across the table. This cabin was never ordinary real estate. He pointed to the surrounding acreage. Several years ago, Ms. Bennett voluntarily entered a federal conservation partnership. I watched every face around the table. No one had ever heard those words before. The official continued. "She retained private ownership of the cabin." He moved his finger along another section of the map. "In exchange, This land became part of a protected environmental monitoring network, preserving critical habitat for endangered wildlife. My mother whispered, "You never told us." "I couldn't," I answered. The agreement restricted what I could disclose. The official nodded. "Certain operational details remain confidential to prevent vandalism and interference." He tapped another document. "However, one fact has always been public. The property's title clearly states that no transfer, sale, lease, or substantial alteration may occur without federal approval." He looked directly at my father. "That approval was never requested." Dad slowly sat back down. I never saw that." "You didn't look." The buyer's attorney rubbed her forehead. "My clients relied on representations made during the transaction." Agent Collins nodded. "And our investigation indicates they acted in good faith." The husband looked at me. "We're truly sorry." "So am I replied. "You were victims too." His wife exhaled with visible relief. "We thought we'd done everything correctly." "The law will protect your interests," the attorney assured them. "The escrow company and title insurer will begin correcting this immediately." Agent Collins confirmed it. "The sale is legally void. The property never changed ownership. The purchase funds will be recovered through the appropriate legal process." The couple thanked the investigators before quietly leaving the house. Their dream cabin had vanished in a single evening. My relatives avoided looking at my parents. The same uncle who had joked that I should thank them now stared silently into his untouched dessert. One cousin finally spoke. "You warned them, didn't you?" I nodded. "More than once." My aunt turned toward my mother. "Elaine, why didn't you listen?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "We honestly thought she was wasting the place." Dad spoke softly for the first time all night. "I thought I was helping." "No," I answered. "You were deciding that my ownership didn't matter because you didn't agree with my choices." He lowered his head. There wasn't an argument left to make. Over the following months, everything changed exactly as the investigators had warned. The unauthorized sale remained permanently void. The buyers recovered every dollar they had paid. The title company and other professionals involved faced their own reviews over how the transaction had proceeded. My parents became the subjects of civil proceedings and a criminal investigation into the fraudulent transfer of protected property. Legal fees replaced the stacks of cash that had once covered the Thanksgiving table. Word spread quickly through our extended family. The story everyone had laughed about became the story no one wanted attached to their name. The confidence my father had built his reputation on disappeared. People no longer admired his decisiveness. They remembered his arrogance. As for me, I spent the following weeks assisting investigators, updating security around the property, and ensuring every monitoring station remained fully operational. The conservation partnership continued without interruption. Several federal officials later thanked me for how professionally I had handled an impossible family situation. That meant more to me than any apology ever could. I also changed every legal safeguard surrounding the cabin. No one, not even family, would ever again have the opportunity to interfere with it. The next Thanksgiving was quiet. Smaller. Peaceful. Some relationships never recovered. Others slowly healed after genuine accountability replaced excuses. I accepted that not every family can be repaired simply because time passes. Sometimes trust has to be earned again. Sometimes it never is. A few weeks later, I stood on the porch of the cabin as the sun settled behind the mountains. The forest was silent, except for the wind moving through the trees. The monitoring equipment continued collecting the data it had been protecting for years. Exactly as it was meant to. I smiled, not because my parents had finally faced consequences, but because the place my grandfather had taught me to respect was still standing. It had survived greed. It had survived entitlement. And in the end, it reminded me of something far more valuable than property. Ownership isn't proven by who claims something. It's proven by who protects it.